And turn my mic on, and it's 6 p.m. Our first order of business is we are in a public hearing to receive comments regarding a proposed zone change from single-family residential to highway services for parcel A-0511-0005-0036, located at 811 West, 200 South, Parowan, Utah. I would say at this time, if we have a representative or the applicant here that wishes to make comments and describe this change, we would welcome that at this time.
Hello there. I feel like I haven't seen you guys for a few months. So 811 West 200 South is the L-shaped white building just to the east of CS Real Estate. And then the church is next to it. It was built, so I made a whole PowerPoint presentation. I hope you guys are very proud. So I looked it up, and it looks like it was built in 1977. Did it let me click? Sorry. Okay. That's okay. I'm like over here clicking. So it was built in 1977. It's currently being assessed and appraised as a commercial building. We purchased it thinking it was commercial. Turns out it was not, and that's okay because I'm hoping today we can rectify that. It has never been a residential building. It doesn't have a kitchen. It doesn't have windows that open. Essentially, it has nothing but 3 rooms and a bathroom. So I think you guys got my letter that I also sent. It doesn't have a backyard. It's just a shop. That's all it is. That's all it's ever been. It couldn't be a residential building even if we tried. So I won't go through every single fact because most of them you've seen. Historically, it has been used as a ski shop from about 1983 to 85 or so. Jet actually ran that at the visitor center. It's also been used as a Yamaha repair shop and an automotive parts store. They also had toys in there every once in a while. I thought it was used as a toy store, but he sold toys as well. So,
when you say Yamaha, they do everything from pianos to motorbikes. What was that?
It was the motorbike side of it.
All right.
There's actually a picture of the sign, and hold on, we'll go forward. Do you see my Yamaha sign with the motorcycle on it? That was on the building, but it looks like it just fell, probably from age. We actually had to go fill the giant hole because we were afraid someone was going to break an ankle in it. So we've solved that. So I've spoken with every neighbor who's answered their door, not every neighbor on 800, but every neighbor I was able to, explain to them what we were doing. And so far from everyone we've spoken with, we've had overwhelming support. Everyone's been very excited that it wouldn't be an eyesore anymore, that it would be a business and not a raccoon hangout. So we are going to have security cameras up, and we've already put up better lighting, and we hope that doing so will keep people from using that to just hang out. The woman who lives directly behind the shop, Esther, her house was actually broken into, and she swears that they just had too easy of access in that little alleyway behind it. And so I explained to her, between our lights and the security cameras, hopefully that will make it less likely for people to want to just hang out over there. Our goal has always been, with everything that I do, to improve our neighborhood and our community and to add to it and not be a pain in the butt. So I explained to them that we're not loud. We're not a Yamaha bike shop. We are an e-bike. So they're quiet. You're not going to hear any noise from them. We've also worked to clean up the whole front of our side, and then the neighbor directly across the street, he's got some overgrown brush, and they've got a situation where his wife is handicapped, and we've offered to help clean up their side as well. So everything we're doing, we just want to make sure that we're helping to improve and make it look nicer. So here's our before photos. You may or may not recognize it. We've heard a lot of people have just kind of driven by it and gotten used to ignoring it. And there's my husband, he's back there, trying to see how durable what was left of that door was. It turns out one kick was all it took. We took it down. So it's been replaced. We've put security doors up as well now, just because we weren't sure if the bottom of the door had been kicked in prior or if it was just age. So here's what it looked like before we started too much. We did some clean out. It had been empty for about 15 years. So in that 15 years, it was used for storage of whatever he wanted. It took us probably 20 or so trips to the dump. And that was after they pre-cleaned it out. So, it had a lot of crap. So we've removed it all. Our goal is to turn it into a bike and sporting goods shop. Right now, if you need it, you order it on Amazon or you go to Walmart or Ross and hope for the best. With all the kids that we have in this town, it's kind of inconvenient. So if we can make it a little bit easier and have some of those items in stock, that is our goal. Make it easier. And to also be nice looking on 200 as people are coming into town and head up the mountain. This is our during, so you'll see this is not from today. Now all of the black framing is red, but we've done a lot of repairs and cleanup, and we really want to make sure that we're adding to the 200 corridor and just not being an eyesore. And there's my husband and my dad. We've removed all of the tile and popcorn fillings and just stuff. And the goal is to just have it open and clean and welcoming and just a part of our community. So here you can see that it was built in 1977. This building in 1977 was built as a shop. And you can see my assessment and appraisal at the bottom for its commercial, but not with city. So it looks like after 1977, that's when Parowan Vista subdivision was built, and it might have just been absorbed into it. We don't have records back that show what happened in the late 70s and the 80s, so it's kind of assumption, but it was built as a shop. It's never been anything but a shop. And then when that neighborhood was built after, you can see this is the house directly behind it. It was built in 1983. So it's kind of showing the picture. And this is where it shows 1983 year built. So everything on that entire neighborhood was built in 1980 to 1983. They actually started at the far end and then moved their way forward. So here is a breakdown of all of the different addresses that show year built, 84, 83, 81, and the 80s. I decided not to be a total pest and put every single address, but I gave you some of the oldest to the newest. So the majority of 200 in this area is highway use, with CS Real Estate directly next door as the only one zoned commercial in that little section. We face 200, we don't face into the residential area. So it does look like it might have just been absorbed into that subdivision. So with my nice little presentation done, I am asking for you guys to please rezone us as HS1 so that we can get that bike shop going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from commission members?
It's been over 15 years that it's been, so Albert Sipcar was the last owner. He passed away a couple years ago. He was the last one who had it, and so he had a business license for auto parts, but he was doing it mostly out of his home in Paraguna. So this one was essentially storage for the business. Yeah.
So you said that you went to the neighbors and to see if there was any objection to this zone change. Did you receive any?
None. So I only talked to 7 or 8. I've knocked on doors, and then I thought, they're just not answering because they don't know who I am. So I've gone back to a few as I saw them carrying in groceries. I'm sure I made a pest of myself, but my main goal was to make sure that they knew what we were doing before they saw the sign. I didn't want people to be like, what is happening, and then make assumptions. So it was just easier to go to them first. So I went door to door, talked to everybody who could answer, spoke with them, explained what we were doing, and not a single person had a problem with it. I also told them, meeting's Thursday, here's what is happening, so that they could come if they wanted to tell you that they didn't want me to do it.
And the property is posted with the sign?
Yes. Oh, sorry, you weren't asking, but yes, it is. In fact, it tried to blow away and we put it back up immediately.
Oh, well, thank you.
So.
And I would applaud you for your effort and research into this property. It's quite a bit more thorough than we're used to, so.
I know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question. So where's the main access? It doesn't come off 200, it comes off that street, doesn't that 800?
It is 200, actually.
That's
So
the
there's,
main access?
yeah, there's a secondary one, but it's not great. In fact, I tried to use it and thought I ripped off the bottom of my car. So, we only use the 200 for the most part. You can't really see, but kind of where my husband would be if that was the actual driveway, there's an actual driveway there.
Coming off 200.
Yeah, off 200.
So what's UDOT, that they said anything? They shouldn't have any issue, but.
No, it should be grandfathered to its use, its access there.
So I would agree with the grandfathering. The only question I have is, these wouldn't be UDOT rules, I guess, but they would be, city rules. So grandfathering, once a use has been abandoned for more than a year, grandfathering is out the window.
Well, I just mean the, UDOT access.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It would be a UDOT rule, not a city grandfathering rule.
Right.
I have a question about the intended parking pattern there. So are you gonna mark spaces there, or is it gonna be a free-for-all? And how much of that front lot might be taken up by display area? I'll just leave it.
So, I'm sure by my presentation you can see that I don't do well with not being in control of things. So a parking lot with lines is important to me.
Okay.
I would lose my mind if people just had a free-for-all. In fact, we've been doing that right now. But for the most part, there will be parking, straight ahead and then facing from what we think would be the best, most effective way for people to get in and out without backing into anybody. And so, as far as display, there is an area, I wonder if I've got a picture of it on here. So, in the far part of that,
Okay.
it's never gonna be a parking area. There's a big old manhole, and it's like a giant anthill. It's not flush with everything else. So that area will probably end up being more yard-looking landscape. Other than that, there will be some bikes that are kept out front. However, we don't intend to have bikes out front all the time. I just feel like that invites potential theft. So for the most part, they'll be brought in every night. And a lot of the bikes that we have now are e-bikes, which are a little bit more expensive. And we've got enough issues with people stealing scooters and bikes right now, we don't wanna add to it. So there might be some display, and if so, it would be on the smaller section between the driveway going in on 200 and 800. So it's about 20 feet? 20 feet. And that area would allow for either people to park their bikes if they're coming in, or for bikes to be out there for display.
My main concern is whatever happens there in the parking area is, what's the plan for overflow parking?
Honestly, I'm not too worried about it. We do have the parking on the side as well. That's a whole area that right now, I've got 2 trailers there, that we just put there while we're cleaning up. That could hold additional cars as well. That parking lot could easily hold 10 or 12 cars, without any issue. And there's a semi that usually parks out on the street, and so our goal is to not utilize any street parking if possible, because we don't wanna be in his way. I'm assuming he lives in that area, but I don't know. So we've never had 10 to 12 people in that shop at a time, so I'm not too concerned. It's usually 1 or 2 people, and a lot of people ride their bikes.
Okay, I would just say pay close attention to the, people are people. So
Yeah.
if there's one tight spot left, they're gonna wanna park on the street. They're just gonna pull up and jump out and go, it's just gonna take me a minute.
Right. And well, and right now, at the current bike shop, anybody who parks has to park on the street. And, there's no on-site parking at all. So I feel like this should relieve any of that issue. Just, there's so much space. Hopefully we're that popular, and if we are, I'll come back to ask you guys about putting a parking lot across the street.
Okay. So, Dan, are we good in the city for on-street parking in front of that?
Yeah, and I've just been looking at the, configuration there. It is a rolled curb, all the way through all the way through into the subdivision. It's really hard to tell if there was ever a driveway that comes off, here, actually, let me show you what I'm seeing.
Just a point of clarification on Dan, does that, the historic district ends at 600 west.
Yeah.
So this won't be in that district, so.
Yeah, good point.
So you can see the on-street parking, by this rolled curb section. It's possible that there was a driveway here at one point coming off that street, but it's pretty clear that this same rolled curb, exists to this point. And I would think that, without knowing or without it being marked no parking, that parking could continue along the side of this, probably out to this point, unless and until either the city goes and marks it red or they put in an actual, entrance there.
Yeah, I agree that is probably all right. I was more concerned with what happens if they pull up on 200 South out front. We good with that?
I know that
Is
the church
street
does.
wide enough?
200
Parking.
South
There's a lane there, so.
is UDOT, and again,
No, I'm talking on
we
this
do have
800.
parking that is allowed there,
Okay.
other than sections where it is painted red. So there could be parking, not obviously here, it's too close to that intersection, but there could be some parking allowed.
I feel like unless you have a death wish, though, you don't usually park there. I know sometimes people do for the church when there's overflow, but 50 miles per hour starts right between CS and us. It's
It is
just not
legal, it is legal to have parking,
recommended.
there's my point.
Okay, well, that answers my question
And
about
that, to answer my question, that 800 west is wide enough to have parking on it?
A
800
semi
west, yeah.
parks there.
Alright.
Yeah, there is existing parking on both sides now.
commercial.
I'm not
Highway
sure if
service.
they're zoned commercial or HS. I know that CS is zoned commercial, but I think Grace is actually HS? Okay,
Cal,
HS.
I'll pull it up.
The zoning map?
Since I got it, I'll pull it up.
Oh,
I
okay.
offered
back
to
to
take a
Callie.
highlighter and fix it, but apparently that's not allowed.
I understand.
So the red is highway service.
Yeah, let's make that so everybody.
So, so this section right here, blue is what, we're looking at this parcel right here,
Oh, I take that back.
which is R1A.
Uh-huh.
The red is highway service and the yellow is commercial.
So the commercial is actually the real estate office.
Mhm.
That's correct. And then the rest of those parcels there are all highway service. And in fact, I had the owner of the real estate office one time in my office, and they said, "Why did you guys zone ours different than the rest?" And I said, "I have no idea. We weren't
Yeah.
here." And they said, "Well, we didn't request it." And I said, "I wasn't here when it was created. I suspect that when this was rezoned, or when this map was created, that was more consistent with the use at the time, and that's why they changed it, but it wasn't something that the property owners requested, according to them."
Yeah, I found that interesting when I started studying the zoning map and was worried about creating an island of some sort. And I went, oh, we already have one.
Mhm.
So.
Yep.
So that's not.
And really, they're two flavors of the same thing. They're slightly different. Commercial is slightly more allowable of different things than highway services, but they're both a commercial zone.
Right, and if it's old commercial, pre some date, you can have a residence.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanna make a note for the record that this property, even though the applicant is requesting a zone change from R1 to HS1, it's actually an R1A property. So it'll go from R1A residential to highway services residential if it's recommended that way. The one I had didn't.
I might have only said R1 because I don't even know the difference between those two.
I think we're good.
The agenda is wrong, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's how it
Oh,
was
the sign does
on
say
the sign.
R1A.
Yeah. The sign says R1A?
It does say I've probably,
But the public notice,
Kelly, I'm gonna switch it back.
the public notice says from single-family residential R1 to HS1. So the sign and the posting are a little bit inconsistent, but we're in the ballpark on this side. I think we're okay.
it does say R1A. Sorry, I took a picture. I took a lot of pictures. I'm documenting this whole thing.
Yeah,
This is my first commercial purchase.
yeah, okay, thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on this application? I will take that as a no and accept the motion to close the public hearing and go into our regular meeting. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Is your mic?
Aye.
You're such a loud guy. Okay, as we move into this, are there any conflicts of interest anybody wishes to declare at this point?
I have none.
No.
I have none either. There are no conflicts declared. Our next order of business is approval of the minutes from August 21st, 2024 and September 4th, 2024. And if you remember at the last meeting, we had a discussion about the brevity in the meeting, or the minutes from the August 21st meeting. Callie took care of my concerns, and I've reviewed those, and I'm good with that. I don't know, did anybody else have issue with any of those?
I reviewed it and also thought that the changes reflected what was discussed.
Okay. Any other comments?
No.
Okay, and then any comments on the more recent August 21st meeting minutes?
August
Yep.
4th, or I'm sorry,
August
September
20,
or September 4th.
September 4th, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Okay, yeah, September 4th are the ones that have been repaired and were fixed.
That was the August ones. The September 4th, that was the first meeting of September. This is the second meeting of September. So,
Okay, sorry. Okay, so August 21st are fixed.
and
Are we
I saw
agreed
no
on that?
issues with September 4th.
Okay, I had one issue on September 4th, and if it's what I said, we'll live with it. On page 2, down, about halfway down the page, there's a bullet that starts with the words page 5. And it says EADUs will be allowed in every zone but industrial manufacturing. That's actually every zone except industrial manufacturing and commercial and highway services. So I'm not sure what we got there or where that was picked up.
The AI minutes.
Yeah, we,
Oh.
oh, okay, so, I had no other changes. Anybody else notice anything?
No.
Okay, well, good job, Callie, on those minutes, really. Thank you. At this point, I would accept a motion on these minutes.
So are you saying that we didn't exclude those 3 different types of zones?
Right.
We
So-
only excluded industrial and
No,
manufacturing?
what I'm saying is we did exclude highway services. We did exclude commercial.
I think it's important that the minutes reflect that.
Well, Callie is making that change.
Oh.
So
Okay, yeah.
what
With-
I had in mind is a motion that says the minutes for August 21st are accepted as written, and the minutes for September 4th are approved pending the change, the addition we discussed, something like that.
I move that we approve the minutes of August 24th as written, and the minutes for September 4th, which will include, the addition of 2 other zoning, types with respect to EADUs, and with that those be approved.
Okay, I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Minutes are good. Okay, next item, we're now back to our meeting part, the public meeting part of the rezone from R1A to Highway Services. Weston, to bring you up to speed, we held the public hearing about the rezone. Are you familiar with that one? Okay, so rezone from R1A to Highway Services, and it's 811 West, 200 South, and that's kind of right next to or across the street from the grocery store, so to speak, in that neighborhood. So it's the building that appears commercial right on the street there, and it's been out of service for quite some time.
Yes.
That's the one. Probably bought parts from him. Yeah. Okay. Discussion from the commission members.
I have no objections.
Okay. I'm going to make some comments and show a couple things just mostly for the record. One, if we could go back to the zoning map. Okay. We could zoom in. There we go. So other than that piece of commercial there, if we look, let me see what we're looking at here. So on the left side of this map, the subject property is going to be that property right up there next to the yellow, which is zoned commercial. And I'm just pointing out that we do have an island there of commercial. That's a bit of a mystery. That said, I don't believe that there's an issue with rezoning that piece of property as requested to Highway Services. We have spots in our code that cite that when a property with a zone bounds on another property, whether it be across the street or adjacent, it can go either way. Now you would look at this, there's some other factors, and here's how I did a little research, and really here's how it played out. So Callie, if you could pull up the PowerPoint presentation, the one I gave you late. So I went through every one of these houses in this entire subdivision. There's a plat map on the table there. The subdivision was recorded in September of 1974. The first homes were built in 1975, according to county records. This is the subject property, built in 1977. This is really where the housing started in this subdivision. As you know, once a subdivision is approved, they aren't built out in 6 months or a year in most cases. They take time to sell the lots and sell the homes. So this is how this went. These blues are all built in within a year or so of this, and the only point there is this was built in 77. So these would have been the only homes that were there at the time. These other lots may have been there and they may have been sold, but none of them would have been permitted yet for homes, with the exception of maybe this 1978 and this 1978. So we came along with a real estate office that I wasn't able to determine when this was built, but it became a real estate office in the real estate people that own it now owned it back in the early 2000s. The hotel came into play in 1988. And then you can see from the rest of these dates how that played out. They continued to build all the way through into the mid-80s. And then it looks to me like it probably tapered off, and then it was, as it is now, built out. And that's just sort of a little history lesson there. And my point with part of that is because that was built in 1977, what it means is this whole area was a subdivision in 1975 when it was recorded at the county. And for it to be a subdivision, and this was included in the subdivision, it was lot number 36. You can see it on that plat map on the table there. It originally would have, well, I won't say originally, I'll say at that point in time it would have been zoned R1A along with the rest of the properties. Now, what happened after that is what we don't know. I don't think we have or can access zoning records and zoning changes that far back to know when somebody might have put in an application to change it to highway services, and then later somebody else came along and said we want to change it back to R1A. I don't know why they would do that. I'm of the opinion that it would have been R1A all along. They ran a business out of there, and it was, I would just say, non-conforming. Probably the best way to say that. And it's just remained that way. Looking at our future land use map, it's not going to be of any help to us on this type of a request for a rezone because the area is already built out. And quite honestly, it's compatible with our code in terms of what's adjacent to it and so on. So I don't see that that's a problem. And in terms of community character, I don't believe that this property, with the plans that the owners have, will do any damage to the community character. In fact, exactly the opposite. And my biggest concerns were neighbors, and good on you for going and talking to the neighbors. I'd have liked to seen more neighbors contacted across the street, but we've actually met all the requirements for notification by posting it and so on. So I think we're good there. Any comments from anybody else?
Got commercial right next door, so
Thank you.
I don't see a problem.
Well, I would entertain a motion at this point.
Callie, can you tell me what item on the agenda this is?
5.
Okay. I move that we move to rezone the property referenced on number 5 in the agenda from R1A to Highway Services.
You need to make a
I would say you
recommendation to
make a motion For a positive recommendation, yeah.
I recommend that, or I make a motion that we recommend to the city council that there be a zoning change at the property referenced on number 5 of our agenda to be changed from zone R1A to zone highway services.
You might wanna capture the parcel number in that.
I don't have it in front of me.
If Callie well, I'll give it to you. It's A dash 0511 dash 0005 dash 0036. You got it? Have you got it? I was waiting for you to look up. No, that's okay. All right, so we have a motion on the table for a positive recommendation to City Council for item number 5 on the agenda, which is the rezone from R1A to Highway Services 1, with that parcel number of A0511-0005-0036. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you guys very much.
Thanks again for all the homework you did.
And you did more, so I appreciate it. You guys have a good day. Maybe I'll see you in another 6 months.
Okay. I can give you a list of properties if you're helping people clean up.
Yes, I do.
No.
I'm working on it. We got trailers and people I volunteer all the time. I mean, bye guys, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Our next item is the noticing code. Now, if you remember, this was a revision to the code on how we notice specific changes, such as, like the one in front of us tonight would have been noticed differently. There would have had to been a notice to all the properties within, I don't remember now, 300 or 500 feet, whatever that piece of code says. And we went through the public hearing last week. We had no recommendations. We had no comments, period. As a group, we previously went through that and agreed we were ready. We can review those again if you like, or we can take a motion to make a recommendation to City Council.
We just didn't have it on the agenda to make that, take that action.
Right, we were not able to discuss it because I neglected to put it on the agenda for our regular meeting. I think those were handed out, right?
They weren't.
They were not?
Not today.
Not today? I thought we had. They're not under a staple, under EADU code? Oh, no, I guess not. Okay, well, I have those two, I happen to have those two here. Does anybody wanna look through those? We can take a minute. I apologize, I thought about all of that.
You want me to make copies?
You want?
I know I'm not gonna have any, comments on it, but
Yeah, me neither.
I just want to get the
Weston,
This-
you wanna take a peek?
statutory number.
Sure.
How would we refer?
Coming your way in just a second. Here you go. They're highlighted in yellow, I believe, where the changes are. Otherwise, it's our standard code.
Do you wanna look at this? Are these the same? Oh, yeah, they are.
Larry, do you just have one copy?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't here last time, I was just gonna look.
Sorry,
Okay.
Callie, you don't have those on the handouts that I sent you, do you?
Was it on the screen? When it works, mine's going on and off.
It's an old trick we use on the old guys.
It still is now, Dave?
Yeah. I mean, I hit it once in a while and it comes back on.
If it's got one of those, if it's HDMI, then just, I'll look at it.
Not now.
So the piece that's on the screen right now, as we look at it, the yellow is the change. It's a modification of the text that existed there already. And this one is specific to conditional use permits. And so the big change is adjacent to or within 300 feet of the boundaries of the property being considered for a conditional use permit.
What about zone changes?
That's in the next attachment that we'll bring up.
Okay.
So you just applied the same, code to the conditional use permit
Pretty much, right.
to the zoning change, correct?
When you're finished looking at this one, let me know, or let Callie know, and she'll bring the other
Yeah,
one.
I'm fine.
I just wanted to clarify, is this using standard mail, or is there an expectation that it is, some sort of a signature required?
No, don't read anything into it.
'Kay.
We chatted
Because-
this with
because-
legal, and,
No, I know, I just wanna make sure that was the final intent.
yes, thank you.
'Cause sometimes these things will come back and they'll say, well, I never received my notice, therefore the city didn't perform, you know, and I guess if we could show that we did, but we don't really have any way to prove that, so.
Is it, well, if it's of serious concern,
It only is when and if there's a problem, then we would either say, well, we did it, or we go back and we change it to priority mail, something that requires a receipt signature so that we have documentation on that. Obviously, that increases the cost. So, what's that? Well, it does say notification shall be accomplished at the applicant's expense at the end there. So, I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying doing this is better than what we're doing now.
I think you gotta do one step at a time, do this till you have a problem.
Well, I think our intention was that the city employee would be able to, testify via an affidavit or something like that, that,
That it was
for this issue, for this particular conditional use permit, they followed the city, procedures.
'Kay.
And so we're not requiring that every time, but if there's an issue, the city employee could provide that, which would be evidence.
and as I mentioned, council was good with that. Matter of fact, it was kinda council that said, you don't really want that certification. But, and that said, I would say that if, you know, there's no code that says you can't do it that way if you want to. The challenge is that since it doesn't say it in code, an applicant could push back and say, well, I'll pay for regular mail, but I'm not gonna pay for return receipt requested or something like that. Anything else, Ben?
Nope.
Callie, will you bring the other one up? So in this particular one, we're dealing with two things. Under 1502.155, we're talking about the notification requirements for a zone change. And again, adjacent to or within 300 feet of the boundaries of the property being considered for an amendment to the number-shaped boundaries or areas of any zoning district. And then 1502.156 is a difficult one, but it's basically says that if there's something being changed, land use code specifically, that applies to the historic preservation district, then you'll notice everybody in the district. So if it applies to one property only, you're gonna paint a home, there's no notification required. But if you're gonna rezone one home, you're gonna notify neighbors like you would. But if you're gonna do something inside the district that says everybody from now on has to have a screen door that's metal, we'll say, the whole district would be notified.
I was fine with all these at the last meeting. I'm fine
Right.
today.
Right. Any additional discussion, anything we need to? Weston?
No.
Well, I would entertain a motion at this point. Remember that it's a recommendation to a code change to city council.
I move that we recommend that the city council adopt the changes as reflected on our draft code here, with respect to Parowan Municipal Code 15.18.055, 15.02.155, and 15.02.156.
Just want to be sure that it is consistent. Are we sure it's historical, not historic?
Actually, you're right, it's historic.
Okay.
Thank you. Those are way easier to fix now. Callie, can you get that changed to those lines? Do I have a second to the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Now we're on to my favorite topic. External accessory dwelling unit, draft code review. So at the last meeting, we all agreed we were pretty much there, and we had some subtle changes. If I can find my copy here. So I made the changes we discussed, and stepping back from it and reading through it, I made a couple of changes. One, and they're in yellow. So in item F, that statement was in in the R3 code that we were proposing to change. And I looked at it and I said, actually, I think it belongs here, so I moved it to item F. No change to the language, just a simple cut and paste. And then I added item G, and I want to point out that that's consistent with our definition of recreational coaches, which follows the state code. And as I looked at this code, there's all kinds of things about what we allow and what we don't in this regard, and I thought it was important that we specifically state that so that it's clear. And then the next change, item 3 on the back in yellow again, the city determines whether an ADU is classed as external or external. That's almost never going to be a problem. It's there because once in a while an applicant will come in and they want to build something where they say, if I make the roof attached at the top, does that make it an internal as opposed to an external, and some things like that. And so it makes the city be the final arbitrator, if you will.
With respect to, G,
Yes.
is it supposed to read with or without motor power or motive?
Our code says motive. That'd be great. Google that.
I have something, but I don't want to interrupt if there's more to say on that, Troy.
We're working through this.
That's what I was wondering, if that satisfied his concern, or if...
We're checking.
Oh.
He's Googling motive.
Oh, okay,
motive
good.
Power
I couldn't tell if something was going on, or if he was like, got it.
Sorry. Yeah.
It can be used as an adjective meaning producing physical or mechanical motion.
There we go. Does that satisfy your concern? Okay, perfect. Dan?
Yeah, H1,
H.
I'm wondering if it's a contradiction with B2. Let me explain.
With what? I'm sorry, contradiction with 2?
B2.
B2.
So in B2, it says that one internal accessory dwelling unit or one external accessory dwelling unit shall be allowed on a parcel if, and 2 says there is an existing primary dwelling or one under construction. And then in H1, says external dwelling units are considered to be primary dwelling units when they are the only permanent dwelling units on a site or lot. So we say that we wouldn't allow it unless there was already a unit on the a primary unit on the lot, and then later we say that they are considered to be primary if they're the only one on the lot.
Right, so if somebody comes along and comes in and wants to build a unit on a home, and they build a 500 square footer, and they put it in the corner of a lot somewhere, and there's nothing else on the property, and it's a permit, then they come along later, that's the primary then and now. They come back a year later and go, yeah, I want to build a 1,500 square foot on there, and they've got a different challenge. And now that I say that, I see where that would be a problem. Because if it's the primary, we also say in code that you can't build an ADU that is smaller than or larger than the ADU, which wouldn't work out.
So is the goal...
Do we need that?
Is the goal... Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Is the goal... What is the goal to do? To say that you cannot build the casita, let's just call it that, before you build the house? Is that the goal of what that
Well,
code
I
is
don't-
trying to do?
That's not what I've envisioned as a goal. I think
I'm trying to
you
figure out what the purpose of
could,
that
think you
is.
could, no, I'm with you. I'm looking at it and I'm going, do we actually need that? If nobody foresees an issue with that, maybe that's a delete that line.
Cause I have had at least, that has come up where somebody says, listen, we're not ready to build the house yet. They buy in a property and they want to build a small accessory dwelling unit type house in the rear of the property with the intention to come back later and build the house.
Exactly.
And I don't really see a problem with that. They would have to, if we do not allow ADUs and they build a dwelling unit, then they just built their only dwelling unit.
Right.
But if we allow ADUs, then later they could come back and build effectively the primary, convert what is there to an ADU. I don't know if that's a problem.
Right. So the only challenge that would be is, let's just say that there's a 700 square foot ADU back in the corner.
Mhm.
And then they come back later and now they wanna build a primary residence. It's gonna have to be twice the size of the ADU. And so, but we could word this differently to allow for that. Or we can take it out and you can sort, Keith likes sorting through that stuff.
You remember when we had this come up, Keith? A while back? And what it was is they wanted to build I know this is not the word and I don't wanna muddy the waters, a barn-dominium.
It's okay.
To then
Defined that.
later build a house. And they wanted to build the barn-dominium towards the back of the property. And they're like, well, even if whether or not a barn-dominium is an allowable thing, we would like to build this elaborate garage with living, quarters in it.
Right.
And I'm saying, okay, well, that's your house, that's your primary dwelling, and if it's in an R1, you can't then build a second house unless we allow ADUs, and that's kinda where we left off with them, and I don't know what happened, but.
That brought up one of the questions I had, which was, like, if they did a barn-dominium, and let's say it's a garage and you have the living space above, it very well could be larger than your primary residence that could be in the front, because it would be a garage with a living unit above it.
I personally would define the apartment as inside the barn-dominium as the ADU and the barn part of it as the barn. I mean, it could still happen like you're saying, but.
Would that be an IADU?
Oh. I don't know.
I was just gonna say, I remember that person coming, and I think it got stuck because they were gonna use containers as building material.
Right,
I don't think we went any further with it because that was his plan, and it got stuck there.
Right.
And I think he was like, acquiesced, is that
Villamor.
the right word? He was like, I'll try to figure something else out, and then he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was because we weren't where we needed to be yet with the EDU. I would say we take that out, because to me it's super confusing, because, I mean, how long of amount of time would pass in between the two? In some cases, if they come in and they say, we wanna build a little thing, we're later gonna build a big thing, maybe there's a way we handle it at that time. But I think if there is one property on a parcel, it would have to logistically be the primary until something else was built. But I could see it kind of roping us into something that we didn't really need to go there. Like, what if it was bigger than what they wanted to build? Then it makes it not possible for them to build an ADU. But what they would be living in would be the EDU.
Well, the space we would box them in, one of the options discussed was, if you have a 700-foot ADU on your property somewhere, you come back later and wanna build a primary residence, by code, it would have to be at least twice as big as the ADU. And so, what we're trying to protect against is the concept where you get two really huge things on one lot that probably should have been a lot split or something else, rather than put a big old thing in and a big old thing in, and now you've got two large houses on a property. Someday, somebody's gonna wanna come in and do a lot split, and they're gonna want a flag-shaped lot or something, because, you know, they didn't quite fit and they didn't envision it that way. It won't be that first owner, it'll be the subsequent sale or something like that.
I just wanted to bring up why we landed where we did on that last one. I think we just got stuck because of the building material he was trying to use.
Yes, I agree. I remember the Connex issue.
But there is another one that they built the barndominium with the intention to build the house on Old Highway 1, 2 houses south of 600 West.
Personally, I'm not opposed to allowing a resident to build a small ADU before they build a house, but I think we have to have, once we get this code in, we need to be savvy enough to warn them that once you do that, there's gonna be some restrictions, so make sure you're planning your whole lot layout, if you will, rather than just say, yeah, go ahead, and they come back a year later and we go, oh, well, now you've gotta build a, you know.
And that was, I remember discussing that concept with them as well at that time. But if I remember, it was in an R1 zone, and we didn't yet, the way I remember it, I didn't remember who was all involved.
So, would we fix it if on H2 we said may become external accessory dwelling units if the primary dwelling unit is constructed or later constructed, currently constructed or later constructed on the same site or lot?
Well, and delete number 1, or are we?
Well,
Oh, no,
I
number
think
1 would stay.
should still be there.
Okay.
If they build, that we can't call it an external accessory dwelling unit if it's the only thing on a property.
Dan, does that address your concern?
Yeah.
Keith, any comments?
I think it's proper. I think it's proper.
Okay. Can you recite that again, and I'll capture the... May become external accessory dwelling units if...
A primary dwelling unit exists or is later constructed on the same site or lot.
So we're adding the words exist or is later constructed.
Yeah.
Any other concerns or comments on language? Thanks for that catch, Dan.
So, does that mean that you'd be taking out B number 2?
No.
No?
That is number 2.
You're just gonna
Number
change-
1 would stay,
Mhm,
and number 2 would, after the word is,
mhm,
would say exists
mhm. Okay.
as the primary unit. Oh, the word is would, oh yeah, exists, primary unit, exists or is later constructed on the same site.
I just had a request from the audience at home to have the panelists please speak into their microphones.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we need to add to number 2,
H2?
H2,
H2.
that if the accessory dwelling unit complies with all other statutes associated with EADUs, or
That, well, to me, that can't hurt. Anybody else?
I don't want them to think that
Yeah.
H2 means that they can overlook any of the other points that we've made here, that it has to be double the size of the dwelling, it has to adhere to all property, side yards,
Mm-hmm.
front yards.
Dan, your thoughts on that?
No, don't have any concern with that.
Okay, so let's, give me that again slower and I'll... On the same site or lot, provided the... Is that where we're headed?
Yeah, let me think
I'll
about
give you a
wording
minute.
for just
Yeah.
a second.
I'll give you all the time you want.
After lot
Mm-hmm.
and adheres to all other statutes or code. You like code better?
All other Parowan City Municipal Code, so PCMC.
Related to external accessory dwelling units.
Okay, so number 2 would change to read, may become, in context, external accessory dwelling units may become external accessory dwelling units if a primary dwelling unit exists or is later constructed on the same site or lot and adheres to all other Parowan City Municipal Code related to external accessory dwelling units.
That's bad.
That's bad?
Yeah. It needs to all, we should just.
Could you say an
Parowan.
existing dwelling unit may become an external dwelling unit? That's about the only thing that makes sense.
May be reclassified as.
There you go.
May be reclassified, okay.
If both units something
Maybe
like that.
become primary dwelling units.
Are you still thinking, or are you...
Well, okay,
Hmm.
the problem with what I said after lot is it makes it seem like they're only responsible to comply with Parowan Municipal Code as it relates to external accessory dwelling units. They need to apply with all Parowan, so let's eliminate the clause that says.
Related to?
Yeah.
Got it. So as I understand it, it would now read, may be reclassified as as external accessory dwelling units if a primary dwelling unit exists or is later constructed on the same site or lot and adheres to all other Parowan City Municipal Code.
Is there another place we could put this so it doesn't, it's not saying an accessory, an EADU can be reclassified as an EADU? No, we're saying it can be reclassified as the primary. Yeah, okay, never mind what I just said.
Okay.
That's why I think you'd say if a pre-existing dwelling unit can be reclassified as an external dwelling unit, if a primary dwelling unit is built on the property, something like that.
Can you write that now?
Yeah.
Are you saying instead of number 2?
Read your version of number 2.
Okay, so number 2 would say, if you include H, external accessory dwelling units may be reclassified as external accessory dwelling units if a primary dwelling unit exists or is later constructed on the same site or lot and adheres to all other Parowan City Municipal Code.
You know what, 5 does what we're trying to do. Just change it from an existing dwelling, a detached dwelling unit, just say an existing dwelling unit. The detached is weird there. If you just say an existing dwelling unit, just get rid of detached, now you've accomplished what we're trying to do. Even at the end, subject to the same criteria and everything.
Okay, so the word detached in number 5 is gone.
Yeah.
And are we deleting number 2?
We strike
Yeah,
2.
strike 2.
Strike 2.
And put on the clause at the end of 5 that says, instead of
As defined by this chapter,
as an EDU, but that it complies with all Parowan Municipal Code.
you could just say as defined by this chapter or something like that. Or in this chapter.
Okay, so as we have this now...
Is everyone kind of playing out scenarios that we've seen and heard? 'Cause, I mean, I remember the couple that came in and they had a little house and they wanted to build a bigger house. And they wanted their little house to become the ADU. Does this cover that kind of request, or does that not? Does that answer that with code?
Your
Yes.
question again is what? Which ones?
They came in with they have a little house and they wanted to build a big house, and then they wanted their little house to be their EADU. Do you remember that?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so does this answer that without it being, you know, a painstaking process for planning and zoning?
The answer now would likely be they can't do that.
Why?
Well, they built the big house in the back, and they left a different house in the front, and at the time, since we didn't have any EADU code, that was approved, and we didn't take into consideration the square footage of what
Yeah, but
became
that-
the EADU.
That's gonna be grandfathered in, but what
Well,
we're
now, yeah.
drafting can address any future
Right, all I'm saying is...
situations, exactly what.
What I'm saying is the situation that the mayor's describing, if this code was in place, that probably would not pass. Because the house that remained is probably more than 50% the size of the new house that was constructed.
And so
I don't know if we're all talking about the same one, but they ended up tearing down the small house and
right,
built the
they
bigger
wanted
house
to keep
anyway.
the small house, and they had to tear down the small house to build their new house, and
No,
they
they
wanted to,
decided to.
they wanted to keep it initially, but
No, then they changed their mind and wanted to tear it.
okay.
And
So
it
I
was
could
in a
just see
commercial
that
zone anyways,
happening.
not in a residential zone. I don't know if we're talking about the same one.
The one I'm thinking about is on 400 North.
I just wanna play back scenarios and apply this as we're talking about it, and make sure it does what we would like it to do. Just so these become really clean.
Yeah, I think it would guide us through that. They would either, yes, you can do it, or no, you can't, based on these guidelines.
I would say it could be problematic, I mean, just the shape of the lot. Does the ADU, what if it's in front, or the side, or behind, based on the shape of the lot?
Right, so now, the challenge now is with the code, there are restrictions. This code isn't a one-liner. It doesn't say you can have an EADU in every zone except commercial, highway services, and industrial. It says you can be permitted to build an ADU on your lot if you meet these other criteria. So it's a non-starter if, in some cases, if your lot's not big enough. The answer is just no. If the setbacks can't be met, the answer is no. And what else? There's several other restrictions, and I have those here. So, Do I?
The other one that we were wrestling with was, what was the size compared to the primary residence?
Right.
And if they switched, just like you're talking about, like if they started with a large, let's say a regular house, residential house, they built, ADU, and then they decide, you know what, we want the ADU to be our primary residence because we downsized and we
Well,
want to rent it out.
yeah,
And that's where
I
it
think
became
we do allow,
problematic.
we just say that the, owner has to live in one of them. We don't say which one.
If the primary residence was bigger than the ADU and then they switch over, they wouldn't be able to do that, right? Because their if they said my primary dwelling is the smaller ADU, is a smaller primary, I turned the ADU into my primary residence, it is smaller than the ADU that I'm gonna rent out. They couldn't do that because now it's the reverse on size.
So they could use the bigger home as a long-term rental? Actually, depending on what we do with short-term rental code, you could rent the big one out as a short-term rental. We haven't written the code yet for short-term rentals. So this code primarily is a decision and restrictions and allowances on how an ADU would be allowed to be built in this municipality. Some of the controlling features on short-term rentals and what can be or can't be a short-term rental would be in the short-term rental code. So we go so far as to say in here that an ADU, external ADU, can be used as either long-term or short-term. We don't address the primary residence in this, and we don't have any other code that says you can, or at this point, that says you can or cannot use a primary residence as a short-term rental or a long-term rental.
With the exception that the owner has to live in one or the other, right?
Right. On property. So that's a restriction that says if you want an ADU, you've got to live in one or the other. Does that answer your question?
I believe it may not be reflected in code, but as we've discussed here, the city employee approving, building applications, if they see one where it's obviously that they're building a small EADU that they intend to live in and later build another home that's bigger, that they let them know that their plan needs to comply with all the existing code.
Right. And it really boils down to, do you have room to do that? A concept is, hey, I think I'd like to do this. But, if you want to build a 10,000 square foot house on a 10,000 square foot lot, at some point somebody's going to tell you, you can't do that, there's not enough room. And so the answer is just no. I don't want to rush anybody. Are you still reviewing or have other comments? I'll take the silence to mean we're still reviewing.
Means, I'm done with
Okay, thank you. Tracy, are you still pondering things? Okay, well, I'll let you.
No, I was gonna say, maybe the short-term rental will clarify part of that.
Yeah, if you're talking about renting, it's really gonna, what's that? Oh, thank you. If you're talking about rental regulations and things, that's gonna be in the short-term rental. 'Cause, yeah. All right, as I understand it now, so on page 2, on item H, 1 remains as stated. Number 2 is deleted, including any changes or modifications to it. And we are now at number 5 that will say, an existing dwelling unit may be converted to an external accessory dwelling unit subject to the same criteria as an EADU as defined by this chapter. Am I waiting for you, or are you checking something? Got it? All right, well, at this point, I would accept the recommendation on this, and because the change is minimal and fairly straightforward, if the motion had a provision to make the change to item 5 as discussed, we can make that change and proceed with the recommendation and have the public hearing at our next planning and zoning meeting.
Do you wanna include the change on B2 as
So
well?
B2 is deleted in its entirety,
Entirely,
including the changes.
okay.
B2 will be, I'm sorry.
H.
Take that back. Whoa. Disregard what I just said. You're right. H2 is deleted in its entirety.
Right,
B2 is unchanged.
right.
And, I'll make this change too. And then item 5 would be revised, as we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we're gonna recommend is that this draft code, as written, is what we're going to recommend to the city council, including the changes made to F and G. Whatever is reflected in the draft.
Did we make a change to F?
Well,
Oh,
you're,
F and G there. Right, I would just say as presented in the meeting, because they're in the draft.
okay.
Or however you wanna say it, you can include those. But the big change that's important to capture is the item 5 change. Given my archaic methods for keeping track of all this.
I move that we recommend this draft code for external accessory dwelling units. Oh. Is it,
That'll help.
is
Rev
it,
6.
is it the sixth revision? Okay. Strike what I said before regarding the motion. I make a motion that we recommend to the city council the draft code revision number 6 with respect to external accessory dwelling units, with the changes discussed within the meeting.
To item 5, H5.
Oh. To include the elimination of point H2 and the inclusion of, or the the revisions to H5, which will become H4, as discussed in the meeting.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Any discussion about that? Do I have a second?
I second the motion, and my only hesitation is number 3, L3, where it says, in no case shall the EDU exceed 50% of the square footage of the primary dwelling on the property. But I don't know how you say that. That's my only concern.
Well, so at this point, what would happen is, so before we actually take a second, so you have some discussion, so you have a concern. Let's discuss your concern, and then we'll talk about whether we have a second on the motion or not. So, state your concern
I
again.
didn't hear
Make
what
sure
she
we-
wanted to discuss. It has to
Okay,
do with
so
number 3.
I would say, for me in the discussion, the only concern I have in the case of the EDU exceeding 50% of the square footage of the primary dwelling on the property. And the only reason I say that is if they switch their primary dwelling. Like they end up with it, living in the EADU as a primary dwelling, and it ends up that it's smaller than what their original dwelling was. Like if they're retiring, or if they downsize because their family is gone, that is my concern out of everything.
But isn't what determines the primary or the EADU the size, right? So even if they moved into the accessory unit, it's still the accessory unit. And they would be renting or whatever their primary, right?
Right.
Well,
And that's not a problem, is it? Because we say they just have to live in one or the other, or on the premise?
so basically you're saying that what they're living in, if they're living in the smaller one, and they say this is my primary residence,
Well, it can be their primary residence, but it's still gonna be the accessory dwelling unit out of the 2 units, out of the 2 dwelling units on the property.
right?
As far as the
So then they
city's,
could still
as far as the
rent
city's
these
concerned.
larger homes. They used to be their primary residence,
I think so, right? Yeah.
right?
Oh, well, I'm not sure what you're asking me. I mean, so you have a property, so you have a lot,
Yes,
and you have a home on it, is that what you're saying? And then you build an ADU.
yes.
And then you, as
Lay-
the lot owner, move into the ADU, and you rent out the primary residence.
Yeah.
I don't think it matters. Yeah,
Oh.
because really what you're saying is, it's a building, it's a casita. If you're thinking about for tax purposes, this is my primary dwelling or something like that, the property owner is gonna pay the property taxes on both of those residences. So as soon as you build the, external accessory dwelling unit, your taxes are going up.
Right.
And it's just for you, the person that's renting or living in one or the other than you might raise their rent, it doesn't have a dog in the fight about any of that. That lot is still your primary residence.
Okay, so it doesn't restrict them from doing that.
No, I don't see why.
Okay. That's my only concern. That was my
Okay.
only concern.
Now,
Well,
Dave?
no, it's just procedure. I was gonna say that you really should, you should get a second, or the motion dies for lack of second, and then you...
We're gonna get a second, but
I know, but before you get into a discussion, you should have had that discussion.
I thought
Yeah.
once we had the motion, you had the discussion.
No, you should have a second, then before the vote.
Okay, well, we're gonna have a second in a moment, but thank you, I'll keep that in mind. So, do I have a second? All right, now just for discussion, more discussion, we're gonna vote on this, and when we vote, we're voting a recommendation. It doesn't have to be unanimous if you're not comfortable with it. The next step is a public hearing, and then we're gonna talk about this code again. And so that's yet another opportunity to get clarifications or to figure out if we have the right language. And then for those of us on the planning commission, the other thing we can do is if you're still uncomfortable with whatever we get up with, say, or come up with, and we don't have a unanimous vote, I encourage you to go lobby your favorite, city council person and let them know what you think about it. Because in the end, the city council is gonna look at this, they're gonna look at our recommendation, they're gonna have some questions, and in the end, they can change language, or they can send it back to us and ask us to change language, or they can just on the spot pencil something in, have it changed and go. So this is, again, not the end of the world. Vote your mind, and we'll go forward from there. All right, we have a motion on the floor and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Kelly?
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank
Kelly,
you all.
do you know who seconded it? Okay.
I didn't know if we would ever get to this point. I wanna thank you all for all the hard work and deliberation on this. It's been quite the journey. We may yet work on this some more before it's all done, who knows, but I think we have a pretty solid document at this point. Callie, I will make the changes to this, and I'll send it to you probably tomorrow, so that you can, will you post it for the next meeting for a public? All right, next item are code definitions. Tell me I gave you a handout, please.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanna make it clear that these definitions have been approved and discussed, some of them a number of times, for recommendation to city council to work in conjunction with our EADU code, the internal code, the external EADU code, and in some cases, the up-and-coming short-term rental code. So there's nothing to do here except forward these.
That's just an extra letter.
Oh, an extra, thank you. There's absolutely nothing to do here except send these to city council. I just wanted you to know that they're going. And these are all final. I've got all the dates and the times and where they're gonna be put. So they're all gonna be placed in Municipal Code 15.04.020. And that is the definitions for land use code. I mean, if you go into Title 15, it's right there.
No objection on my part.
Okay. I'm not asking for a vote, 'cause we've already done that, meetings past, so I'm just giving you a heads up that I'm taking it out of the closet, so to speak. Any more discussion on
You don't need to
definitions?
make a motion or send it for recommendation.
We've already done all that.
You
I
did
have the
that.
date, so I can go back to
Okay.
the minutes and get it for you.
All right, that's what you're referring to, thank you.
Yeah. So Callie, I'm gonna send these definitions. Actually, you already have them. I'll take one quick look at the attachment, make sure there's no yellow and stuff in it. And those also will be for the public hearing. Well, here we go.
Yeah,
Short-term rentals.
maybe.
I wanna say one thing about the handout.
Okay.
I lost sight of the fact that we even had a draft piece of code because we did that back in May. We specifically tabled that for future discussion. And here we are. So I don't know how many of you might have already reviewed this. I'm gonna tell you straight out, I haven't. I consider this open forum to talk about any of the provisions that are in this. These are concepts. I did do a lot of research back then, so there's concepts in there that you may embrace or may not embrace. I may or may not be prepared to defend those or even explain those. But I will be as we move along. So if you have questions, concerns, what I'd really like to have happen, the goal of this discussion, I would like to hear what provisions we would like to have in a piece of short-term rental code. Almost a brainstorming. What are your concerns? What do you want to have happen? What do you want to not have happen? And then I'll take those concepts and do some research and try and work them into another draft that we can start working through. And we should be done by 9 p.m. I'm kidding.
Very funny, Larry.
Well, under the purpose, there's a question that says, will we allow external ADUs to be used as short-term rentals? And if we're not, then we don't have to draft this because we also, by state law, can't allow internal ADUs to be short-term rentals.
Right, so we will just say that in here. So, you're saying in the purpose?
It's below the purpose. You say,
Oh.
will we allow external ADUs to be used?
And the answer now is yes. And I would qualify that. I would say yes with restrictions. So, I mean, some of these are superficial and some of these aren't. I'll just rattle through some thoughts here. So what kind of things would become issues that we would wanna discuss or consider when making short-term rental code? And remember, these are short-term rentals. Forget ADUs for the moment, just think of them as short-term rentals, the big house or the little house. Is parking a consideration? Do we care how many cars might park there at any given time? Is it okay to go into a 1,500 square foot home in a development or a residential area and have 30 cars parked out there? Should there be a limit based on the parking? or you just, or we don't care. Just something to think about. There's gonna be a minimum number of parking spaces required based on other city code, right? The EADU code plus the code for the primary residence. On-street parking would be available for, short term for an event like that. The other thing, we have noise code. Do we think our noise code is sufficient, or should there be special noise code for EADUs? Some of these things I ask about because in researching this, other municipalities often have fines and restrictions, and you can lose your, well, in this case I'll say license or permit to operate a short-term rental if there's too many violations. Things like provisions for trash after a party, how do they keep them? I mean, again, some of these are minor. What about complaints? If we're gonna base a license or something, or restrictions on if you get more than X number of complaints in some period of time, then potentially lose your license. The other thing is when there is a complaint, typically municipalities have code that requires that I'm gonna say fully authorized representative of the owner, so it could also be termed as a manager, can respond within some fairly brief amount of time. So if you call somebody, they might have to be there within an hour to either put an end to whatever's happening that the complaint is about, or to mitigate that with city officials. Something else to think about. The other thing is how many short-term rentals can you have in a municipality? Is it unlimited if you build one? If you build something and you want it to be an STR, can you have one? Can a whole block be STRs? Whether they have an EADU or they don't, we're talking about, again, full-size homes and condos and apartments and those sorts of things. Many municipalities actually limit that in a number of different ways. Often they will say you can have a certain number in town as the maximum number is one way. And I don't know, we'd have to have a discussion on and some research probably about how you determine that maximum number, because you don't want it to just be an arbitrary number. So we'd have some backup for that. Other municipalities often say there can only be one every so many feet. Something with numbers like they've got to be a minimum of 600 feet apart, 800 feet apart. That sort of language. You could limit it by the number in any given, neighborhood or a block. I don't know how you would define that yet, but something to think about. Another limiting factor for short-term rentals I've seen is you may not be able to have a short-term rental within a certain distance of a business that is a hotel or a motel. So if you want to build one across the street from the new hotel in town, you might not be allowed to do that. Of course, it'd be grandfathered if it was already there. But, there's other hotels and there's a bed and breakfast in town. Do you put other short-term rentals there, or how do we manage that? Some municipalities write in the concerns for safety, and so they'll put in safety code that says you've got to have a fire extinguisher in every short-term rental, or some number of fire extinguishers depending on the size. There's probably other safety features that will come to light as we research this. And then, do you limit the number of guests based on the size of the rental, the square footage, or the number of bedrooms? And as we do those kinds of things, the baggage, if you will, for the city becomes enforcement. So typically there's an application, you fill out the application, The city looks at it and you meet the criteria or you don't, but some municipalities actually require an on-site inspection. And then who would that be? Is that, something like safety could actually be a fire chief or somebody else designated to do that? 'Cause it would be a checklist. It's not like you just go in and it's a subjective thing. It's just, you have these requirements and they have to be there. Or it's a violation.
I have a question. What about CCNRs? Like, 'cause it
In
seems
what
to me,
context?
well, the question is like if CCNRs either prohibit or allow, I mean, it seems like that would be part of a requirement.
Tracy, I'm sorry, I can't.
Oh, you can't hear? Okay, so I was saying, like, in a residential setting, like, for example, in Heritage Hills, in that subdivision, when we drafted the CCNRs, we did not prohibit vacation rentals. We just took that, the language just wasn't in there. So, therefore, it was up to the residents. If they wanted to, they'd have to go through what the city required. But basically, but if our CCNRs had said short-term vacation rentals are not allowed, it seems to me that would supersede, the city's requirement, or somehow be put in the city's requirement. It has to be consistent with what their CCNRs are.
I would think the general rule is that, CCNRs can, be more restrictive than the city, but not less restrictive.
Yeah, basically the CCNRs, I mean, really just mainly state they prohibit what you can't do. But they don't really, some of them are pretty loose and open, but as long as it's specific on being prohibited, therefore, if it was in the CCNRs, therefore that seems to me it would supersede what the city would have one way or the other.
Well, and that would be my opinion. That's in effect now for just about everything. If a community has a set of CCNRs, the community enforces those, that community. So I'll just say Eagle Rock because I know they have CCNRs and that they're a planned unit development. So if somebody, I don't know, if there's a civil violation of some sort, or somebody drives down the street and breaks all the windows out of all the cars, that's a city challenge, and the city's gonna do that, and that's not gonna be in the CCNRs. But if in your CCNRs, you have other things that say you can't do this and you can't do that, the CCNRs rule in that community, even if the city is more lenient. If we say you can have short-term rentals in town, they read that code and it says here and here and here. And then you're gonna say CCNRs. So I'm thinking what you're asking is we would put a provision in that acknowledges that CCNRs, yeah, perfect.
Same thing, it kinda applied like to the historic district, if you wanted to, limit them there, or don't.
So do you,
I'm not advocating one way or another.
well, so that's a good point. I just did pull the string just a little bit for now. So in the historic district, would we tend to say we could have short-term rentals and it would just be city code, or would we have a provision there, clause that says we would run that by the historic preservation district for comment?
I'm just throwing it out.
I'll make a note, we need to think about that. superficially, I can see pros and cons.
Well, yeah, there could be buildings that are, you know, residences, whatever, that they'd want to have that type of use if it's has that character or whatever, I mean,
So, right, so in that district, I'm not uncomfortable with EADU code because that would go to the Historic Preservation District, just like any other building permit would that was in that district, so we're covered there. And then the question I guess I have is it any of the municipality's business whether or not you rent your residence out short-term if you meet all the requirements of the code? Should the Historic Preservation District say, you can't do that? It seems to me like that would be an unnecessary
right, I think you're,
thing.
interfering with
But
code.
I'm still gonna make a note so that we don't just,
I'm not advocating that, Larry, by any means, so.
well, I think it's a good point. Anybody else, any thoughts they wanna throw out?
I think, that it may be helpful to talk out and discuss a philosophy that we want to, guide us here. My sense is a reflection, to reflect what the community feels, we should try to be as less restrictive as we can. The community feels like I have property, I should be able to do what I want to do with my property, and I would be inclined to respect that, to the extent that it's not an immediate issue with the neighbors. You know, I don't wanna say they can have unlimited parking, because the neighbors aren't gonna like having to accommodate, short-term rentals with having so many people. But in terms of things like, whether we're gonna limit the number of them in Parowan, I would be inclined not to.
So there's, well, a couple of thoughts. I fully appreciate the comments about it's my property, I'd like to do what I want. And I would ask people that subscribe to that comment fully to understand that while it's your property and your lot, it's our neighborhood. And so there's really two sides to that coin.
I do like the way it's set up now, where you have to notify your neighbors within 300 feet. And if there's an objection, then you have a hearing on it. So I do think notifying neighbors and checking to see if there's disapproval on that. I also think on parking, I think it is a good point. I mean, if you have a vacation rental and they're taking up the whole street because there's so many people in it, I think that would be problematic for the other neighbors. And I probably would say, is there currently a parking ordinance for just residents? And so I don't know how we make that consistent.
So when we get into a parking ordinance about where you can and can't park, I know there's code for parking large trucks on the streets is not legal. But I think on-street parking in general is permitted. And I don't think there's anything that limits the number. And I don't know if there's anything that says you can't block your neighbor's driveway. I mean, it's rude. You might be sorry that you did that, but in the end, I don't think it's illegal. So, but
To block a driveway?
I said it's not illegal. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not legal.
Okay. There
I
you
mean,
go. I was just
yeah,
gonna
it's
argue.
not illegal to do that.
Oh, it is illegal to block a driveway.
Really? Do we have
Yeah.
code that says
Mhm.
it's illegal to block somebody's driveway?
I'm pretty sure we do. I think I've read that.
Okay, I'm good. I stand corrected.
Yeah.
I'll take it at that. I don't wanna.
Yeah, that's a no-no. Don't park in someone's driveway.
Yeah, well, we know that. People block mine every third day.
So Larry, short-term rentals will be, you'll have to have them classified in the conditional use permit?
So really, the way that would play out, if you wanna do a short-term rental, I don't know about long-term rental. What do we do if somebody if somebody rents their home long-term, that doesn't require a business license or anything?
No.
If I drive away from town and rent my house to somebody else, that's my business. Okay, so short-term rentals, the way that plays out now is you're required to have a home occupation permit and a business license.
So you'd have to have a conditional use permit.
And home occupation pushes you
So
into...
that's where the 300-foot notification's gonna come in.
Yes, exactly. Well, things are coming together. Some of them. So, anyway, so that's the way that would work. So the neighbors do have a chance to weigh in. And in regard to your comment about, Troy, about what the community might want, that's what the public hearings are for. And, you know, they're certainly welcome to attend these meetings, and I know that's not the perfect answer, but that is an answer, because we don't have a survey that says how many of the roughly 3,000 people that live here, how do you feel about short-term rentals, and that's what...
So up until this point, all they had to do is get a business license, wasn't it? They didn't have to go through the conditional use permit process. They did for a short-term rental?
As far as I know. I think so. Isn't that right?
So all the short-term rentals have a conditional use permit?
No.
No?
They do?
And
Somebody from the city speak up.
I don't think they do. Yeah.
We have a business license and a home occupation permit. They have to apply for a home occupation permit, 'cause by definition, they're doing a business in their house.
So the answer is yeah, they would have to get a conditional use permit.
Okay, I know
And we-
that now, but prior,
What's that?
all I've known them is to have a business license. I'd never known
Well,
them to have
prior, we didn't even
conditional
address
use
it.
permit. Yeah.
The first time we have addressed this in code was when we created the TRT tax, and we actually made it as part of the TRT tax ordinance that they would have to get a business license and get a home occupation permit. We discussed doing this, we knew that this short-term rental code was coming and would be suggested. Back then, of course, we were just barely getting off from our advice from our prior attorney saying, don't even mess with it. And we were being told, there's actually some pretty good code that cities have now done that's been pretty well litigated. And we now encourage you guys to have something in place if you want to regulate it at all before you pretty much get built out with short-term rentals. So that's when we started, considering it, and now we're here, considering it.
Right, but to this point, they just have business licenses.
But we never, I mean, by definition, if they were doing a business, but the problem is renting your home, is that a business? People rent their homes all the time,
Long-term.
long-term. This concept of a short-term rental is fairly new, and so we never have really officially ever said, yes, a short-term rental is a business, therefore you have to get a permit. We haven't really done that until that TRT code was put in place, like anywhere in our code or policy.
Well, okay.
So,
Prior it wasn't done. Okay.
Okay, so in our short-term rental code, Dan, are you of the opinion that, we need to at least give a head nod or an honorable mention to the fact that a business license is required and a home occupation permit is required? Or do you think that's
Home
already
occupation
covered in the
permit
other
is,
code?
here's the challenge with the home occupation permit. There's one phrase in the home occupation permit thing that says this: the business shall be managed by a member of the family that lives on site. And by definition, if you have a house, a single house, and it's an STR, and you're renting it out, you don't have members of the family living on site. We need to address that if we're going to I don't know as we have to have a home occupation permit required for these. If we actually have code that regulates them specifically, it's probably fine. It's just that without anything else, we said you had to have a home occupation permit.
So, well, and my concern becomes the neighbors. So you, with a home occupation permit, you put notices out, and the neighbors get to weigh in and say whatever it is they want to say in regard to that. And so you've at least got the feedback of the immediate neighbors. Without that, there's nothing. I mean, they just pop up, which in my opinion has the potential to generate some complaints. Because one, it's not, we all know it's not a perfect world, and so when you have short-term rentals, there are violations, there are complaints, and so you put things in place to mitigate those. But if those neighbors didn't know they were coming in and they're all of a sudden there, it seems to me that they're going to tend to potentially be more hostile when they make a complaint and more diligent about it. Is just a thought.
So you could take away the home occupation permit requirement and make a conditional use permit requirement and accomplish the same thing.
Yeah,
But then you'd have the noticing and all that stuff.
right. Yeah, and a public hearing. So yeah, I agree.
Because our home occupation permit is a conditional use, but it's really an administrative one unless there's an objection, right?
Yeah.
So the question is this, I
Yeah.
guess. Do you want those to be administratively handled if there's no objections, like a home occupation permit is? Or do you want every single one of those to come here with a public hearing and a conditional use permit? I mean, I have one on my desk today, and there's a conflict of interest because it's by somebody here on the committee. These come in from time to time. Do we want to have every one of those come to here for a public hearing and a conditional use permit? Or if there's no objection, that's the way the home occupation is. If there's no objections, it can be handled administratively. We're still going to look for issues and want to mitigate any issues. Make sure they have their parking, make sure they have, X, Y, Z, but...
So if you don't have any sort of a hearing, and it's just an administrative, here you go, here's your permit, the neighbors don't know.
Well, no, we do send out a
Yeah.
notice to all
Oh,
the
you do?
neighbors on a home occupation.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's one of Stacy's functions on every home occupation.
So,
So with our,
yeah, I think streamlining would be better.
okay. So with our new noticing code,
Even without it, it would still be done. It's just that you would have to tweak the home occupation to allow for somebody to run an STR without living in it.
well, I think that could be done.
That could be the simplest, most elegant way to accomplish it.
Simple's better.
So I like the administrative approval, especially with the notifications. And so an absentee owner that isn't renting their property but lives next to or adjacent to one, they still have a mailing address and they still can. Okay.
Now, having
Alright.
said all of that, I will give you some advice that I got from Maria Twitchell, who is the county tourism person, who goes to a lot of conferences, hears the horror stories that cities have had and so forth. A trend that cities have been seeing across the country, that, in fact, there's a lot of people that will say this has contributed to our housing problem, is that you have large corporations, think BlackRock, that are buying up houses throughout subdivisions, turning them into short-term rentals. That's one of the things that I've heard. There's a lot of things that you could do. What you want to do is you want to protect the ability for a local resident to generate additional income. Like everybody agrees, that's probably a good thing. But how do you restrict large corporations from buying up multiple houses in a subdivision and turning them into short-term rentals and effectively killing the residential neighbor of that neighborhood? And that one of the suggestions is you only allow a short-term rental if the owner lives on the property somewhere. That's one suggestion that could be considered. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that was what Maria said. That's your fix that a lot of cities have found is a solution. Or you could say they live in the city limits somewhere. That would also do it. Rather than just a big nameless, faceless corporation. The problem with the nameless, faceless corporation, I'm not trying to beat up on corporations, is that the city has almost no recourse to find somebody and hold them accountable if they have a problem with the property. You get a problem with a property, the neighbors are complaining to the city's like, we don't even know who to cite. We have a P.O. box from an LLC, and it's some company, and they send in a cleaner, and we don't even know who to even hold accountable for these raging parties or whatever it is that the neighbors are complaining about. So that's why they say you need to have somebody that lives on site or within a certain radius or something. So you can say, Dave Burton, your STR is causing the neighbors problem night after night after night, therefore you need to fix this problem. That's easier to do than something LLC that's based out of Nevada with a P.O. box, and you know what I mean? How do you even get there? And so that's one of the suggestions. But
So some of the code that I've seen with regards to that included provisions for, one, either an on-site manager living on the property or an owner. Secondly, some of what I think are probably the more lenient ones, you had to have somebody that could a fully empowered individual for that corporation or company or that short-term rental that could respond within an hour to a complaint or a violation.
yes,
Period.
they'll have a time limit that they have to be able to respond by.
And if they don't do that, those are recorded. It's in the record for that file. And after a certain number of violations and a violation of the show up on time code,
We can't just say.
they lose their permit. And that's the end of it.
That'd be a legal question, yeah, I don't know.
But I don't think that addresses the ownership as far as, having, a corporation come in and buy up a bunch.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think that is an issue we need to think about.
Well, I'll do some research. I think there's some code out
Yeah.
there for that. I wonder if we could just make a hefty short-term rental tax if you own. The more you own, the higher the tax is, or something like that.
Well, you better add second homes to that.
Hmm? What's that?
Add second homes to that tax.
There you go. Yeah. Well, they're
need
taxed
to-
a little bit, right? A second home is
Yeah.
a non-primary residence.
But, that's another discussion, but you need to do something as far as restricting that
Okay. Well,
business.
I'll look into that. I made a note here, and I'll do some research. Don't let that preclude any of you from, looking into that, 'cause we need ideas. It's not cast in concrete. I haven't looked to see if we've got license requirements.
Sorry, Tracy, I didn't
Oh.
mean to out you that you have an application. It probably should have declared a conflict. You probably didn't think about it, so anyways.
Yeah.
I wasn't I wasn't shooting an arrow over there, it just occurred to me as I was talking.
It occurred to me too when she asked a question and I thought, uh-oh. All right,
We're not voting tonight, so
yeah,
it's probably
no,
fine.
this is really just an open discussion. So, here's a concept. One business license per person. So, you can only license so many.
Yeah,
Whether that's 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 in that category.
I was thinking that as well, like 3.
Per person. What do you mean by per person?
Well, we could
Per person or
define that
corporate
again,
entity.
concept, I don't know.
Because you could, so there is a, and I will not call them out because I'm not in that business. There is a, and I thought it was really ingenious. There's a property in town that's owned by an LLC, and they're prominent short-term rental. And the name of the LLC that owns it is the property address LLC. So you could literally create 100 LLCs and own 100 different, so that's what I'm saying. You'd have to figure out how to word that so that it's effective if you wanted to restrict it in that matter.
Well, I know with LLCs, you have managing members, and whoever is the majority managing member of the LLC, their name has to be on that. So that would be a way to determine, like, if I guess they could keep switching their managing members, but it would.
But you can have a corporation be the managing member of an LLC, and I don't know, it can get kind of hard to trace ownership after a while if you're stacking trusts and.
Well, that's a if. Ownership is questionable, no license
If ownership is questionable, no license. There you go.
or something, I don't know. But conceptually,
Somebody
we
with
could look into that.
flesh and blood has to come in and talk to us.
Yeah. There's also the potential for licenses and registrations expiring on some basis. So I don't know what's a business license good for these days. Is it a year? Another provision is STR licenses and registrations are non-transferable. In the event of a sale, lease, or other transfer of any property containing a dwelling licensed as a short-term rental, the purchaser, leasee, transferee of the property or the owner shall be required to reapply for all appropriate inspections, permits, and licenses. So there's no automatic renewal. You can't sell it and say this is already approved. And I think I mentioned before, short-term rental building inspection required. That becomes a challenge because they would have to generate enough income to probably pay for somebody to do that. And then I have here's one on parking. The owner or manager of any short-term rental shall ensure appropriate off-street parking is provided for its occupants of the short-term rental in accordance with the following. A. Parking shall be provided at 1 vehicle per bedroom. Tandem spaces on a driveway may be used, which is contrary to some of our other code. Unless on-street parking is specifically approved by adjacent property owners, off-street parking shall be provided on the same property as the short-term rental. And the number of vehicles allowed for the occupants of a short-term rental shall be restricted to the number of parking spaces provided by the owner, which might be doable. Oh, when we talked about number of occupants, an owner may not allow, and this is from state code, an area within a short-term rental to be subdivided into multiple short-term rental units. So you can't rent a short-term rental and then sublet a bedroom. And they may also not accommodate more than one reservation at a time in a single short-term rental. So you can't rent it to 2 families, so to speak. shall be unlawful for any transient lodging facility to be occupied by a greater number of persons than that which it is designed or furnished to accommodate. And this one, I'm not sure where this one came from. This might be from a municipality. The maximum occupancy in any dwelling licensed as a short-term rental shall be 10 persons at any one time. If, however, the property has a fire sprinkler system or other fire suppression system acceptable to the Parowan City Fire Department, a greater occupancy may be approved. Maximum occupancy of the dwelling must be included in the regulations sign. So that was another thing that was common in short-term rentals. They all had to have postings. You know how you go into a hotel room and you read the back of the door and it tells you how many people can be in the room and what time checkout time is and safety regulations and stuff. So that kind of a sign prominently posted so that there's nobody that says, I didn't know that, kind of a thing. So we might consider that. And then it goes on, I won't go through this, required on the posting, the business license, the contact person, location of fire extinguishers and emergency exits, a map showing the property boundaries and parking spaces, maximum occupancy, trash pickup day, and so on and so on and so on. And then there's a clause in that I came up with somewhere, prevention of noise, nuisance, or trespass. And basically it says the owner's got to preclude that. No disturbing of the peace, and there's some times involved. I don't know how that would dovetail with the city's already in place nuisance code. And then I've got enforcement provisions. And those are in the document that I handed out. I encourage you that we're going to continue this conversation next session. So come back with your ideas and opinions on this stuff. If you've got questions in between time, call me. I'm happy to, walk through concepts and make notes about things. But mm-hmm. Well, that would be awesome.
I don't know if I'd promise it the next one, because one of the tools that we're hoping to use is the report we get from the state on TRT tax. And that comes to our treasurer, and that position is vacant, so we'll get a new treasurer hired. They'll get the new access and get those reports, which, by the way, are protected. We can't share that information.
Oh, okay.
But we can use it to make sure that, like, sales tax outlets are coming to the correct city code and stuff like that.
So the right. Yeah. Dan, on your comment about it's protected information, but city staff can read that, right?
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to be. So if you read that and came in and said there are a total of
Oh,
this
yeah.
many in compliance and that many.
We just can't talk, about a specific,
Yeah, we don't
like, we
need that.
couldn't say, Joe's business is doing this amount of revenue this year.
Right,
That would be us violating that.
yeah.
They would pull our access like that.
Okay, so we could use that other information, though, I think.
But
the
yeah,
numbers-
generic information, of how many total we have and the amount of revenue that we're getting on TRT tax.
Yeah, I mean, any,
Stuff like that, yeah.
even the amount of revenue might not be important to us to write.
Not for this discussion, no. But like, for example, the hotel that is a hotel, then it isn't a hotel, then it is a hotel, that's a zoning question, and that, and whether or not it's, 'cause it's zoned as a hotel, it's not zoned as apartments, and so that's one of the questions that has come up from time to time, and TRT tax is a part of that, so.
Yeah, perfect. Any other comments about short-term rentals while we're here? Okay. Again, please go through the draft, take some notes, bring them back, call me, send me emails, whatever you need to do to, I'd really like to keep this moving along. Like, 'cause I expect it's got a ways to go. All right, we can get out of that discussion and we're into reports. Dave, would you wanna start?
Oh, I don't have anything, thank you.
Okay, Troy?
I do not have anything.
Dan?
Nope.
Weston?
Oh, good.
Tracy?
Nope.
Man, what an easy bunch. I just wanna say, well, just a couple things. So some of the city staff and city council attended a Utah League of Cities and Towns seminar in, somewhere up north, and brought back quite a bit of information. And I just wanna say that it's quite encouraging to see city council members attending those and city staff members going, 'cause really in a team building process, you need the same information base. So as you start encountering some of the language that goes on there and bringing it back and using that, and we start to get in tune with what's going on, and it helps us all. So I just wanna say that's a great thing. There'll be some opportunities for some of us on the commission eventually.
Hey, on that note, and we've done a lot of training, probably blown through our training budget. There is a training this fall that I have signed up for. It's up in Salt Lake, so it's a pretty big commitment. But it is put on by the Utah Land Use Institute, and they will be talking about Supreme Court decision affecting, there's a few line items on there that I thought might have some real substance, and if so, I'll bring it back. Probably not one we're gonna wanna send everybody to just for sheer cost, but I have signed up for that. So hopefully we can get the things settled down at home, and anyways, that's my plan. But I did wanna make everybody aware that if you see that email for that, I will be going and taking good notes.
Okay, perfect. And with that, I don't have anything else. Reports are finished. We have one last motion for the evening.
I motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? We are adjourned. And I just wanna thank everybody again for all your hard work and effort on the EADU code as we push that forward.
We'll take these out so they don't drain.